It was a cold, lonely night as George drove down a desolate highway. His eyes burned with exhaustion, and his grip on the steering wheel tightened with every passing mile. He had to stop. His body couldn't take another hour on the road. Then, as if by chance, he saw it. A small, run-down motel emerging from the fog. Its flickering neon sign read, "Vacancy." George pulled into the empty parking lot and stepped out of his car. Gravel crunched under his boots as he eyed the building. It was old, its paint peeling, windows clouded with dust, but at that moment it was better than sleeping in his car. Inside, the motel owner stood behind the counter. A thin man with a tired face and an unnerving smile greeted him. "Welcome," the man rasped in a low voice. George leaned forward, his desperation evident. "I just need a place to rest for a few hours. I don't need much, just a couch or even a corner. Please, I promise I won't bother anyone." The owner shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry, but all the rooms are taken. I can't let you sleep in the lobby either." George sighed, his voice trembling. "Please, sir, there's nowhere else to go. I'm too tired to keep driving. I'll take anything." The owner hesitated, glancing toward a dim hallway behind him. For a moment he said nothing. Then finally he spoke. "All right," he said. "You can rest in my room, but—" He leaned in closer, his tone sharpening. "There's one rule you must follow." George nodded eagerly. "Of course. What is it?" The owner's voice dropped to a whisper. "Do not, under any circumstances, open the door at the end of the hall." A chill ran down George's spine, but he nodded quickly. "Got it. Thank you. I really appreciate this." The owner handed him a key, and George made his way down the dimly lit hallway. The air felt heavy, and the silence was unnerving. When he reached the room, he found it simple, just a bed and a nightstand. But it was enough. Exhausted, he collapsed onto the mattress, his body sinking into the worn fabric. Within moments, he was asleep. Hours later, George woke suddenly. A sound. Faint, haunting music drifted through the air. It was distant, like an old record playing somewhere far away. At first, he thought he'd imagined it, but the melody persisted. He sat up, his heart pounding softly in his chest. The sound seemed to come from the hallway, the forbidden door at the end. Curiosity gnawed at him. Against his better judgment, George got up, his feet padding softly on the cold floor. He approached the door, his pulse quickening with every step. Bending down, he peered through the keyhole. Inside, he saw a woman. She wore a flowing white dress, her movements slow and graceful as she danced to the eerie music. Her long, dark hair flowed like shadows around her. George's breath caught in his throat. The sight was hypnotic and unnerving. He stepped back, shaking his head. "I'm just tired," he muttered to himself. "It's nothing." But when he returned to bed, sleep didn't come. The music played on, growing louder in his mind. Unable to resist, he went back to the door. He crouched down and peered through the keyhole again. This time, all he saw was red. Not a light, not a filter, just an overwhelming solid red, like the entire room had been drenched in blood. His chest tightened as fear gripped him. George staggered back, shutting the door. He climbed into bed, pulling the covers over his head, trying to shut out the music and the terrifying image. Eventually, the sound stopped and the night faded into silence. The next morning, George packed his things and went to the front desk. The events of the night weighed heavily on him, but he couldn't leave without asking. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said hesitantly. "But I have to ask, what's in that room? I heard music and—" He paused, swallowing hard. "I saw something." The owner's face darkened. He let out a slow, heavy sigh. "That room," he began, his voice tinged with sorrow, "belonged to my wife. She loved to dance, but she passed away years ago." If George's blood ran cold. "But I saw her. She was dancing." The owner's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "That's impossible," he said. "After she died, her eyes turned blood red. She watches anyone who dares to look through that keyhole." George froze, the color draining from his face. Without another word, he grabbed his bag and bolted out of the motel. As he drove away, the fog closed in around him. Yet, no matter how far he went, George couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still watching him.